Hello, and welcome to Vendor Trash. Is the title a reference to my opinions, my drawing skills, or both? That is for you to decide. Grinding. It's been a part of WoW, a part of MMORPGs, since the very beginning. And over the years, with increasing frequency, I've noticed the player base expressing aversions to the concept, which at times can certainly be understandable, but on the whole seems quite bizarre to me. Grinding is a part of the DNA of the game, and I think abandoning it would be an enormous misstep on the devs' part. Of course, the presence of grinds and farms is not some binary thing. They can always fine-tune the amount of such activities and the intensity of them, but the arguments that they are by their very nature unfun or disrespectful toward our time tend to fall flat to me. In this video, I'm first going to discuss the benefits of grinds and why I tend to enjoy them, and then go over the main pitfall with them that must be avoided. First, the upsides. By far, the most significant of these would be the sense of accomplishment that grinds provide. Look, it's basic human nature. We like completing tasks. Not always doing them, certainly, but almost always completing them, especially if in some sort of list-like format. Now, a common argument I see levied is that players shouldn't derive any sense of accomplishment from any grind or farm that did not require any noteworthy skill to obtain. This is usually brought up to defend when certain rare rewards are made more readily available, or to advocate for such a change. I really don't agree with this viewpoint. Although there is value in working smarter, not harder, we as humans also ascribe value to hard work as well, even if that work is not particularly skill-based. But we don't need to be abstract about it. You've obviously completed at least a few big grinds in the game. How did you feel when you hit the finish line for any of them? Certainly relief, but I imagine also accomplished. You did the thing. Not everyone is willing to do the thing, but you did, and now you've got the reward to show for it. Well done. I see posts all the time from people finishing the expansion metas, some of which are massive time investments, and I've not once seen a post saying that they regretted it. At most, there might be a complaint about a specific sub-achievement that had been holding them back, but that's about it. Everyone who set out on the journey found their efforts worthwhile. In a similar vein is the sense of investment that gradually gets created the more grinds or farms you complete. Take reputations, for example. They're one of the game's most consistent and trackable grinds. You know what feels awesome when I log on to my main? Opening up the reputation pane and seeing all of those maxed out exalted bars. And I sure as heck wouldn't feel that way if they were all just the passive ones that you don't have to really try to get. The same goes for mounts and anything else. Each individual grind completed adds to how invested I feel in my characters and in the game as a whole. Now, you could argue that's just sunk cost fallacy at play, but I think that's being unnecessarily dismissive. An often undervalued benefit that farms can provide players is a way for them to, in many cases, zone out and think about other stuff. I can't tell you how many hours I've spent listening to podcasts while slaughtering local populaces for a 1 in 10,000 drop that I desired. Heck, one of my fondest farming memories was shortly after I came back to the game in MoP, waking up at 4 AM to farm Zandalari Warbringers for about 3 hours every day before the rest of the server woke up. I legitimately loved it. Granted, many people get the same experience while cleaning their house or cooking dinner, but I prefer my brain shut-off time to be as unproductive to my real life as possible. And lastly is a point that may be more contentious in its value, but they extend your playtime with the game. I know the idea of Blizzard dragging out r/played hours to keep us subscribed longer so they can make more money is a prolific one, and I'm not even saying there isn't a nugget of truth to it, but WoW is an MMORPG. For many of us, it's supposed to fill the role of our main game that we keep coming back to, and which replaces some of the less appealing games we may resort to in order to fill our free time with. Look, I love WoW, so sometimes when I'm feeling pretty dang caught up on everything, I actually get a little sad that I don't have more reason to play. It's a balancing act, of course. I don't want to feel chained at the hip to the game either, but done in proper proportions, I will always be happy to have more excuses to dive into Azeroth. So, those are the benefits I see in having an ample quantity of farms, but even I can admit that certain grinds can really suck. At the risk of oversimplifying the issue, I think the main problem is simply when a grind combines too many contentious elements. I've identified 6 such elements to cover here: an activity feeling mandatory, being difficult, being lengthy, being time-gated, being highly RNG-oriented, and being dependent on other players. Any one of these factors is generally fine on its own, but when you start combining them into a single activity, things start getting stressful. If you combine a bunch of them, it can get downright painful. Let's look at each in turn. First is if a grind feels mandatory. Now, players, myself included, will stretch the definition of mandatory pretty dang far, but I think the fair, objective answer is anything that awards non-trivial player power. I don't think power grinds necessarily need to be completely avoided, but they should be kept fairly minimal to keep everybody happy and not burnt out. I think a great example of how this is handled well is the need to progress through and farm dungeons and raids. Now, you can certainly argue that this is a long grind and it does require other players, but I'd argue those don't really feel applicable here because dungeons and raids are what the bulk of players do for their main form of entertainment. That's the core activity that you're doing already anyway, so the additional time investment is close to zero. And if you aren't doing these activities, well, they and the power they offer you really aren't mandatory anymore. They become something you're choosing to pursue for your own whims. Second is being difficult, by which I don't strictly mean being blood-pumping, sweat-inducing, ultra-hardcore stuff, but simply anything that sort of makes you pay attention or feel a little bit of pressure. A solid example of this, in my opinion, are the vicious mount grinds since Dragonflight. As long as you can maintain the trivially difficult rating of 1000, you can earn one of these every season for about an hour per week of effort in an activity you can queue into by yourself from anywhere in the world. Now, for most players, PvP isn't going to be relaxing. You are put into an alert state of sorts, but that minor difficulty is really the only thing arduous about it. Third would be if a grind or farm is particularly lengthy. A recent example, and one that I've actually seen criticism toward, are the miscellaneous Mechanica mounts from Undermine. This item is rewarded primarily through the Paragon caches of the 4 cartel reps, and a cache is earned for every 10,000 rep beyond Exalted, each box containing about 1 to 2 Mechanica. There are 3 mounts to be earned that cost 25 Mechanica each. Now that sounds quite daunting, as even assuming 2 Mechanica every box puts this at 380,000 reputation. The thing is, that reputation is quite easy to get, simply by doing the 3 Undermine weekly quests, a task which takes about 12 minutes a week. You can earn 6,000 rep baseline. That maths out to 64 weeks for all 3 mounts, a bit over 1 year. Or if we assume the worst case of 1 Mechanica per box every time, 128 weeks, about 2.5 years. Is that a lengthy grind? Yes, absolutely, at least if going by timeline instead of hours invested. But that's really all it is, and so I don't mind it in the slightest. Heck, even if you hate the grind, you can actually just buy them from other players off the auction house, albeit at quite hefty prices. Fourth is being time limited. It's quite simple, really. Anything that can only be earned within a narrow time frame per year, or worse, ever, is going to add stress to a grind. In my opinion, a well-handled version of this are just about any holiday rewards that can be obtained from vendors using currency. It's almost completely deterministic, and if you're willing to invest the time, you can pretty much get everything within one holiday cycle, even if there are years of backlogs, since alts can usually earn full rewards too. So just cycle through all your characters and fly all across the world to the elders or bonfires or candy buckets, or do whatever dailies and you'll be swimming in the goodies. Fifth would be any reward that is strongly tied to RNG. I know RNG always has and always will get hated on, but I think it's an integral part of the MMORPG experience, and it's really not a bad thing on its own. I think a fantastic example of this is actually the Infinite Time Reaver mount, and to be clear, I still don't have this mount myself. Prior to the Quantum Courser from Dawn of the Infinite, it was only available as a 1 in 4,000 drop. The thing is, that drop is from any time-walking dungeon boss, and there's no cap on how many time-walking dungeons you run. Really, the only limitation to how much you throw yourself at this RNG is if the event is up for the week, but that's hardly a rare occurrence. At worst, it was up to 7/7 of the time, but now with how often we get Turbulent Timeways events, it's probably closer to 50-50. So, it's a case of very extreme RNG that works because it isn't paired with any of these other factors. And lastly, there's the need to have other players involved. However you may feel about needing to work with others, it is undoubtedly an obstacle, especially for any task where it may be troublesome even finding other players who need or want to do the activity you're interested in. One instance of this that I think works relatively well is the reputation grind for the old school Steamweedle cartel reps and the Bloodsail Buccaneer rep. The bulk of these grinds boil down to killing guards in Booty Bay and killing goblins on a beach in Tanaris. Technically, none of this strictly requires other players, but it will go significantly faster and more smoothly if you have them. A full 5-man is best, but a 4-man is almost as good as that, a 3-man almost as good as that, and so on. It means that you're never completely out of luck whenever a single member of your farming crew calls it. And while it may be a somewhat obscure grind nowadays, I'm pretty sure you can find some people for it during peak hours at least. So those are the potentially stressful factors and what were, in my opinion, some ideal examples of how to utilize them. But what are some rougher examples? Where do the grinds start to feel unfun? Again, it's when you start to combine these factors. Take the vicious Mount Arena grind. Prior to Dragonflight, this required finding at minimum one other player in Group Finder who you would then queue into matches with. They could then bail at any time, often leaving some vitriol in their wake. Combining a need for other players with an activity that was at least mildly difficult made it a much more grueling experience that actually generated longevity as a third factor as a result. Or take the Ol Mol Rufus drop from the Lurker of the Deeps in Ringing Deeps. This is a 6% drop from a mob that can only be summoned by clicking 5 levers across the zone in a short time frame. I don't know if anyone can pull double duty here, but it certainly isn't possible for a single player to hit all 5 in the allotted time. So generally speaking, you want at least 5 players, and you'll be doing this an average of 17 times, though potentially far more with bad RNG. Not necessarily awful if you did it at the start of the War Within like I did, but far worse now. This grind sucks because it combines a need for other players with RNG, and it's also an example of failure to future-proof the activity. Speaking of RNG, let's touch on holiday rare drops. These have gotten better in recent years, thanks to bad luck protection being incorporated, and most now operating on a heightened drop chance for your first kill of a day. But it can still be frustrating missing out on one of these you want in any given year, and having to wait another 50 weeks to try again. The Big Love Rocket was the poster child for this unholy fusion of a time-limited and RNG grind with its former 1 in 3,333 drop rate. Thankfully, it's gotten better, but the general practice still isn't my favorite. Let's talk about Torghast. Now, while I personally didn't mind it so much because it was less than an hour per week and a fun activity, Torghast was reviled by their player base for being a chore they felt obligated to do every week for their legendaries. Thus, it became an example of something that was praised in beta because it felt very optional to being hated in live because it felt mandatory and it lasting a long time. Potentially all expansion if you kept wanting to make legendaries. And the last example I'll cover here is the Dark Fuse Reputation grind, which quite abysmally combines 3 of our pain points. It's long, even with the 200% reputation events up. It somewhat requires other players to go smoothly, or you'll just have constant interruptions to your trash pile sifting. And to top it all off, it's somewhat RNG because the mount reward drops from a Paragon box, so you could have to do that final 10,000 rep multiple times. I'm usually a big advocate for Paragon rewards, but combining it with the other factors here just feels mean. I mean, I was lucky and got it in one go, but still. So, are grinds and farms good for the game? Are they fun? Well, everyone's opinion will vary, but for me, I think the answer to both questions is a resounding yes. There are always going to be cases where they take it too far, and I think it's fine to criticize such cases. But a WoW with nothing to grind in it is not a WoW I have much interest in playing. They simply serve too many positive purposes, from the senses of accomplishment and investment, giving you a fun way to zone out, and giving you more reasons to play. For this week's drawing, I decided to go with Lei Shen, the Thunder King. Now, a more obvious pick would have been anything that I could have tied to the Insane in the Membrane achievement, because while I don't think that's one of the hardest grinds in the game, it is one of the most iconic. But there weren't really any characters tied to those reputations that I liked well enough to draw, or haven't already drawn. So I just went back to a grind that I have fond memories of, the aforementioned Zandalari Warbringer farm, which, I don't know, I mean, these guys were loyal to Lei Shen in patch 5.2. It's a loose connection, but I wanted to draw Lei Shen, who I personally really enjoyed as an antagonist. I mean, he doesn't get a lot of screen time whatsoever, but he did have presence. I mean, he's a massive, muscular Mogu who wields lightning and managed to throw Ra into his basement. He was a heavy inspiration for one of the characters in my own writing, and where he further developed and given a lot more screen time, I would have been okay with him as the big bad of Miss of Pandaria. I mean, I think Garrosh works fantastically well, so I'm not upset about it. Oh, and he just had a really cool raid fight. I don't remember it super well, but it had 4 quadrants, and whichever quadrant he was in, he would charge and get different abilities. And he would have an intermission, and he'd try to push you off the edge. Fun times. Anyway, I did consider a few locations to draw him in, obviously the arena where you fight him, but wound up going with the bridge after the Council of Elders that he winds up destroying and making you fall down into Tauros' room. It's a neat looking spot, and while you cannot skip the cutscene if you're going back and farming the place for whatever reason, you can avoid triggering it in the first place if you don't run out onto the bridge and just go to the side and jump down and hopefully have slow fall or blink or something. I don't know what non-mages do. Anyway, I was pretty content with how it turned out. If anything, his body, particularly his chest, wound up looking a bit too smooth, so maybe I should have drawn some muscle lines on there. But whatever, I'm content with it. So thank you for watching, I hope it wasn't too much of a grind, and I will catch you next week. Bye-bye!